Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics we hope are relevant to you. In another packed show today, we shine the spotlight on how Modi's government uses fake narratives to justify its actions against the Sikh community. Tensions flare and more anti-female intimidation rears its ugly head as the doctor murder rape trial reaches the Indian Supreme Court. And talking about courts, Nikhil Gupta's case is adjourned. And on the 23rd anniversary, we remember the first Sikh victim of post-9/11 violence. And if that's not enough, we discuss the nuclear arms race underway across South Asia and what it could mean for Khalistan. Well, joining me as always for Perspectives is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to our amazing viewers out there. I see a few of you are still putting up there what cities and countries you're watching us from. We love that. But also keep in mind that it also helps us with the algorithms on YouTube to push our videos up higher. So we appreciate your support in every step of the way and are happy to have you as a part of our program.
Indeed we are. And together, James and I will be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. And of course, we will be taking a look at lots of your lovely comments at the end of the show. So thanks very much for those as always. But let's get things underway. James, what are you going to start us off with today?
Well, we are going to start with this fantasy land of the Modi government. Now, as you can see here, we have just been going off on this for years, but it still continues. In the most recent escapades of their fantasy world, they have claimed that there were actually grenades thrown at the High Commission in Ottawa for India. They claim that the recent searches in India of the jailed MP's family, Amritpal Singh, they say that the family, in particular his brother-in-law, who is a Canadian resident, they claim that he was involved in the violent outbursts and violent protests that took place last year in front of the High Commission in Ottawa. They further went on to say that 2 grenades were launched over the walls of the High Commission and that charges were brought in relation to that offense in India. Now, the funny thing is that this is a narrative that was brought up many times since then by the India government and other officials, and the Ottawa police have very clearly and adamantly said there were no grenades launched. There was no violent protest. It was a peaceful protest. It was very calm. It was very orderly. And at no point was there any violence, especially any explosives thrown into the property of the High Commission. So again, no grenades. Plain and simple. It doesn't get any simpler than that. And this is just an ongoing, example of India's claims and allegations against innocent individuals who are speaking out against the Modi government, those who are active in the Khalistan movement, and those who are just basically opposed to certain public policies of not only the Modi government, but also state governments throughout the country. Now, this has been going on for decades and generations, but it really has been a concern over the last several years, especially with the increased foreign interference, the arranged disappearances, and the deaths and assassinations of foreign citizens on foreign soil, not to mention the arranged disappearances of Indian citizens on India's soil. Now, this should not only be a concern for the Sikhs, for the Muslims, for the Dalits, for the Christians, anyone of minority, but it should be also a major concern for the Hindus in India and outside for that fact, in that you have a leader who is in a fantasy land who thinks that the whole world is going to join him there. Instead, the rest of the world lives in reality, and we see the lies, we see the human rights atrocities, we see the lack of concern he has for all citizens, and how easily he's going to try to lie and manipulate his citizens into hatred, into distrust of each other, into false narratives. And again, that should be a concern of every single person in India and around the globe. as India continues to work towards being a dominant world power when it comes to finance, when it comes to military, when it comes to the alleged democracy, the largest democracy in the world, they sure are not acting like it. There's no place in a democracy for a leader to lie to those who he represents, to lock up and arbitrarily detain anyone who speaks out or is in dissent to the government. There is no place in a democracy to just encourage hate and violence and to accept human rights atrocities, to accept sexual and physical violence against women and children. It is just not acceptable. Now, back in 2003, in relation to, again, the claims of the grenades, so as you can see, it's been going on for a while that they continue to make these claims. And the World Sikh Organization president, Tajinder Singh Sidhu, had sent this message back in June of 2023. And I'm going to read it as it was written. India's attempts to malign the Sikh community and interfere with affairs of Canadian Sikhs have taken a bizarre turn with false allegations of a grenade attack on the India High Commission building in Ottawa. False. While we are aware of the peaceful demonstrations that took place on March the 23rd, 2023, there were no reports of any violence during the event. Very clear. Charging Sikh activists for attacks that never took place is another low for the government of India, a tactic the Indian state has used in the past to justify the arbitrary arrest and extrajudicial killings of Sikh activists. And we know, for example, we talk about Mr. Najjar here in Metro Vancouver. Indian media stories of Amarjot Singh, Canadian permanent residents, being charged in the fictional attack in Ottawa also reference the deaths of Hardeep Singh Najjar and Avtar Singh Kanda as other individuals who led protests against India. This is a thinly veiled attempt to intimidate and harass Sikhs in Canada. It also seems that Amarjot Singh has been named in order to harass and pressure by Amritpal Singh, who is currently being held in India at the jail in Assam. We call on the Canadian intelligence and law enforcement to monitor this situation closely and ensure that following the assassination of Mr. Najjar earlier this month in Surrey, no other Sikh activists are harassed or targeted in Canada. And of course, we know that since that point, more things have happened. And in relation to his comments up here, in relation to Amritpal Singh's brother-in-law, Amarjot Singh, again, his home was raided recently, and we brought that story to you yesterday. Now, on the 18th of September, coming up, there is a protest planned, a peaceful protest at the embassy in Vancouver, the consulate in Vancouver on Howe Street, that starts at 12 o'clock noon. For anyone wanting to attend, the buses will be leaving from the Guru Nanak Sikh Gurdwara on Scott Road in Surrey, right on the Surrey Delta border. So again, that's going to be a peaceful protest once again to not only commemorate the public standing up and speaking out of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the Parliament, stating that India was a credible threat and a potential involvee with the murder of Mr. Najjar and other individuals worldwide. So this has been going on, but again, it's going to be a peaceful protest, and it's just a matter of speaking out against these extrajudicial deaths, against the arbitrary detention of not only individuals, but also elected members of parliament in India. And it just has to stop, and it has to be spoken out in terms of international governments and world leaders. They need to speak out against countries, and we do it against China. We talk about the child labor. We talk about the government oversight. We talk about the corruption, the human rights abuses in China, and yet we're looking the other way for India. And that's not how it's got to happen. We've got to hold them to the same standard we would hold our own politicians in our own country. If we're going to expand trade and other agreements with India, they need to step up their game and actually start acting like a true democracy and not like I want to say a communist party, so to speak. But yeah, they just have to start acting like a true democracy and not be creating such a hatred and divide within their own borders. We're seeing too much of that around the world. Again, Modi's in his fantasy land. He's got to come out of it and start taking leadership and guiding his country, because let's face it, whether you're Hindu, whether you're Sikh, whether you're Dalit, Christian, or anything, if you're in India, there is the great power and opportunity to really display how great India can be and how great the India people are. And we know that already, but they're not given that opportunity to really shine on the international stage. So it's time that that happened. Once again, on the 18th, there will be that protest in front of the embassy in Vancouver, the consulate, and I will be there. If you are in attendance and want to speak to me, come on over and say hello, share your opinions on camera with me. I'd be more than happy to talk to you while you're there. And other than that, as we say, all of these arbitrary arrests and the BS that follows. Tomorrow we're going to report, or I will be reporting on Malvinder Singh Mali, who's been arrested. He is a reporter, a journalist, and a political opponent or, critic. And we're going to discuss how he has been arrested, and they're calling it an IT Act case. So we'll get into that more tomorrow, Angus. But it's, just a fantasy land. Modi continues to believe that, the world doesn't see all of the crap behind the smoke screen.
Yes, interesting analysis, James. And in fact, yes, yesterday, I think when you reported and you mentioned the grenade attack, I didn't mention it at the time, but I didn't mean to mention. Yes, of course, we reported last year when this allegation of a grenade attack was made by essentially the Indian right wing. It was Hindutva. We reported at the time it was absolute nonsense. There was no grenade attack. But it occurred around the time when there was all sorts of misinformation flying around, deliberately being spread across social media by the Hindutva online army. There was, if I recall correctly, there was official reports of, I think, one of the Indian High Commissions or some diplomatic residence in California that was allegedly set on fire by Sikh activists, which actually turned out to be, no, it wasn't. There was just a bit of rubbish that I think a homeless man had accidentally set alight or something. So it's a whole sequence of nonsense, but it creates a fake narrative. It all paints a story, doesn't it, that we know is completely false. But it is designed, it is a very directed, deliberate campaign by the Indian right wing, the Hindutva army, but of course they are in turn controlled by the Indian government, the BJP, and in turn by the RSS. Now, of course, one of the key foundations of this narrative is to paint Sikh activists, particularly Khalistani, as terrorists. Of course it's nonsense. They're not terrorists, they're just political activists. But once you paint somebody as a terrorist, it creates a whole different narrative, doesn't it? It allows, firstly, it manipulates the population against these people. Ooh, terrorists, they must be bad. So there's a psychological manipulation going on there to try and sway the population, sway the public against these people. Secondly, there's a more sinister agenda at play. Of course, once you start labelling terrorists, it means these pieces of legislation, particularly back in India, that the BJP have brought in, these really questionable anti-democratic pieces of legislation, the anti-terrorist legislation like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the National Security Act. These are pieces of legislation written very deliberately to mean that the burden of proof, the threshold of the burden of proof is much lower. You don't need such a high burden of proof to lock these people up. Basically, it's a charter to lock up anybody that you think as a government is a threat. And it's very easy to justify that. So, of course, they're using these pieces of legislation to lock up people like Amritpal Singh and Jaggi and all their colleagues, the many political opponents of Narendra Modi that now languish in jail indefinitely. That's what's going on. So, unfortunately, it's as we have peeled back this mask on a regular basis. We know what's going on behind the mask, behind the Modi BJP mask. They are, as we reported, certainly in recent days, and particularly from the podcast last week, they're essentially controlled by the Brahmins, the ruling class of India. And they are bringing in all these mechanisms. They have an agenda that we've highlighted on a regular basis. They are using this so-called democracy, all the mechanisms of democracy, and they're using it on a seemingly legal manner. So they're using the anti-terrorist legislation to lock up their political opponents, but on the face of it, it all seems legal. Actually, as we peel back the mask, no, it's not really under any Western justification, any Western lens to analyse it. There's no democratic rule of law going on here, but to the average Indian voter, and that's what matters, to the average Indian voter, it matters. They believe what they're told. This narrative is working, so they're turning against the Sikh population. They think Khalistanis are terrorists because that is what they are told, and they see they are locked up. So they must be criminals if they're locked up, despite the fact that the mechanisms under which they're locked up are themselves questionable. But on the face of it, the average Indian voter believes that these people are criminals. They turn against the Sikh community. They support the BJP, thinking that the BJP are protecting them, when in reality the BJP are just an extension of the RSS, who in turn are an extension of the ruling elite, the upper caste, the Brahmins, who are keeping the Indian population under the cosh, under their control. They don't realise the bondage that they are being kept in. They are slaves of their own system. They don't realise this. It is only the Sikh population that is trying to open their eyes to the slavery within which they find themselves. All we can do, James, from our side, is keep that mask open, is peel back those layers and try and get the truth to the average Indian voter, to make them realise just what is going on, that the Khalistanis are not the enemy, they are your friends. The Sikh community are not your enemies, they are your friends. They are standing up to the injustice that unfortunately you, as the Indian population as a whole, do not seem to be able to see, that you are slaves under your own system. But James, thank you for that, a very interesting analysis.
Yeah, and I hope people enjoyed the little cartoons there. Maybe we should do an animated series. Modi in Fantasyland. Next on Fox.
I don't think anybody would believe it. It would be so fantastical.
By the BJP, and we can have the evil troopers played by raw agents. It could be.
The raw stormtroopers.
But let's move on to the next story, as we know that by the time we hit the end of the show, we're going to be going up. We're overtime once again. So back to the serious lines, though, of what's happening in the courts of Calcutta. The murder and rape of a graduate from medical school has hit the courts. The Supreme Court has made several rulings today as the trials start, and one of the most significant that I was actually quite shocked by is that the court ordered that the proceedings be live streamed. Now, there were advocates who had requested that it not be live streamed, that the live stream be stopped. Given that there are threats going to not only witnesses, but also to the lawyers involved in the case. And these threats have ranged from acid being thrown in their faces, threats of rape and violence. And the judge came back and said, no, it is in the public interest to have these proceedings live streamed. And I would assume that they will take steps to protect the identity of any persons who are testifying and want to be anonymous to the general public on the stream. But again, I'm not sure how they're going to handle that. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court has ruled that, yes, it will continue to be live streamed, and that the judge also went as far as saying that anybody who is being threatened, whether it's a lawyer or a witness, that will be investigated swiftly, and that punishment will be handed out very harshly for anyone trying to intimidate witnesses or the court process. So it's good to see that in Calcutta they are, the judiciary does have the balls to stand up and say this is not going to happen in our courtrooms. And we wish that more judiciaries would stand up and take a stand on all of these delays and all of these motions that are so common within the overworked and understaffed court system within India. And it doesn't make it easier when the courts are tied up and further delayed by intentional delays by the prosecution or by law enforcement. And it's just an ongoing issue that sees hundreds and hundreds of hearings and appearances within the courts where people just don't show up. If they don't feel like showing up, they don't. And, there's got to be ramifications for those who have been ordered to be witness or to make claims in the courts. When you are paid by the state as an officer of law enforcement or an agent of the courts, then you need to be held accountable and you need to be prepared for the court system. In most countries around the world, there are time restrictions on cases. If the prosecution does not proceed through the court system in a timely manner, then the cases can be dismissed. And that is not something we see in the India courts, but that should be something that's looked at. Of course, with increased supports, employees and judges, they have to deal with this problem that is just ongoing. And finally, in that court procedure, the website Wikipedia was actually displaying a photo and the name of the victim, which any journalism agency with integrity would definitely not allow this to happen. You don't name and shame victims in whether it's sexual assault crimes or any other without permission and without the blessing of the family. And sometimes that is done by victims or family members as a way to educate the public, to create more conversation around the issue of human rights or women's rights, or, there's a lot of different reasons why people choose to be named. But again, without that consent, Wikipedia should have taken the name and the photo down without it actually having to be ordered by the Supreme Court there in Calcutta. So again, we hope that, Wikipedia takes some steps to ensure that they protect victims in the future. It is a lot of contributions from a lot of people around the globe that make Wikipedia happen. So they really need to make sure they have controls over what is posted there and take responsibility to ensure the safety. It's just an ongoing battle, isn't it, Angus?
It is. This is just another example, another visible symptom of the cultural problem in India around the treatment of women. Now, firstly, the whole issue about televising or streaming the court case. Well, that's a tricky one. The pros and cons arguments for and against that. Here in the UK, we do not televise or we don't stream court cases. We felt that has been the right way to proceed for many years. Essentially, one of the main arguments is that the law mustn't be influenced by any external factors. It must be enacted cold, emotionlessly. The trouble is, once you start introducing cameras, then you start getting people playing up to the cameras and trying to become celebrities, etc. It takes away from the actual process. So that's one of the arguments. I do understand in the US that it's essentially up to the judge. If the judge particularly feels it is in the national interest, they have the ability to allow streaming of proceedings. But yeah, in India, right. Well, again, it's pros and cons. I probably stand on the fence on that issue specifically. But the real thing that jumps out at me on this story, again, James, is this whole issue where the female lawyers are being threatened online through social media, threatened with rape, threatened with acid thrown in their faces. Again, on what possible premise is it okay to issue a threat to a female to throw acid in their faces or to rape them? I mean, again, it just points once again to this ingrained, inherent cultural problem that India has, where women are treated and seen as second-class citizens. In fact, not even second-class citizens. They are treated as objects that can be used and abused. And again, it just horrifies me to hear that even lawyers, educated women, high-achieving women who are in the Supreme Court are being threatened by very poor quality men, clearly low achieving men with minimal intelligence, to issue threats like this. And again, it just highlights this ingrained problem in India. And once again, as I always do when I go on about this particular subject, the buck stops with the government. It is up to the government to stop this. And again, it will take a generation to change the culture in India to do this. But I see no signs, or very little signs, that it is happening, certainly not to any significant extent. And when threats, if threats like this were issued anywhere in the West, whether it's the Americas or here in the UK or across Europe, any person who put on social media a threat like that, their door would be kicked in within 3 hours by the local police, and they would be marched off forthwith to a prison cell to await trial. It would be absolutely not just unacceptable, it would be not tolerated by anybody within society. That person would be spurned and publicly shamed by everybody in society for daring to threaten a woman in such a horrible way. And unfortunately, we have acid attacks here in the UK, and it seems, generally speaking, to be, again, it focuses in on the Asian population. So it is Indians quite often bringing this dreadful crime into Europe. Again, it's culturally ingrained in India, this threat of acid attacks. It's a deeply wicked thing. That's the one thing that jumps out at me on this story, James. And unfortunately, and I'm not going to go on because we do go on regularly about it, but yes, the buck stops with Narendra Modi's government. You've got to do something about this. It's got to be taken on ruthlessly because it has to stop. If you want to join the top table, it's unfortunately you cannot bring a nation that sees this as okay with you to that top table, because it just does not belong in civilized, modern 21st century society.
Yeah, and especially given the heinous act in which is being tried. I mean, it was the murder and rape of a doctor, in a medical facility. I mean, how can anybody defend or go after people that are dealing with this case? I mean, that to me just surprises me. And just like there in the UK, Angus, we have sketch artists in our courts in Canada. We don't allow cameras. We don't allow video. And, and I agree with that. I think that it should be just accountability to the justice system and to the public, but not aired for entertainment purposes. There is a time and a place for a camera over a sketch artist. And, a very easy example of that is my colonoscopy. I want a little camera going up there, not a sketch artist. But so that is just it. It's just a horrible situation all the way around. I hope that the courts proceed and that the legal process will prevail with a fair and just result.
Indeed. So we'll keep reporting on that story as things develop. So, okay, let's move on to my first story. Let's stay in the court system, and just a quick one just to update on the Nikhil Gupta case. Apparently, the hearing has been postponed until October the 18th. So the upcoming status conference in the case of the United States versus Nikhil Gupta, that was initially scheduled for September the 13th, has been postponed until October the 18th. The decision comes after both parties mutually agreed to the rescheduling, allowing more time for the necessary legal preparations. Now, presiding over this case is Judge Victor Marrero of the Southern District in New York. The judge issued an official order granting this extension. This adjournment aims to ensure the effective representation of all parties and to prevent any miscarriage of justice. The court has ruled that this delay falls under the Speedy Trial Act, which permits postponements when it serves the interests of justice. Now, federal prosecutors, led by Assistant US Attorney Camille Fletcher, had requested the additional time to complete the discovery process. The discovery process is the legal obligation for you to reveal files or evidence that you may be trying otherwise to suppress. So this discovery process needs to be completed and prepared adequately for the next steps in the case. The defence counsel, Mr. Gupta's counsel, consented to this request, ensuring that both sides will have sufficient time to review the evidence and build their respective cases. So what actually has happened here is that the prosecution has discovered, they've demanded, obliged whoever has been, who holds some evidence, they've been forced to reveal it. And of course, now both sides need time to go through that evidence so that each side can prepare their respective cases. Now, the key considerations of this situation, the postponement does signal that this case has actually become extremely complex. There's obviously a lot of evidence being uncovered, and this evidence, as it's still very much an ongoing investigation, and clearly they've just discovered some new evidence that needs to be brought to light, and both sides again needs to look how this impacts their overall cases. And the upcoming hearing on October the 18th may reveal more about the charges and the defence strategy moving forward. And as the legal process continues to unfold, all eyes will be on this case to see how it impacts both the defendant and, of course, the broader legal landscape. So there you go, James. Just a little update. Things are moving, but it looks like more evidence has come to light in recent days.
And not really a surprise, given that it is a multinational investigation and evidence coming in from various law enforcement agencies. I mean, we know that the case here in Canada in the Niger death, there's over 20,000 pages of discovery, and that doesn't even include physical and other evidence. So it's quite the task for the prosecution.
Indeed, and we will, of course, keep you updated as when news filters out on progress on that court case. Okay, let's swiftly move on now to my second story, a bigger story now. This is taking a big step back, and we're going to once again look at geopolitics of the South Asian region, how Khalistan's going to fit into that, but specifically focusing on one area, and that is the nuclear arms race. Now, we do know that both India and Pakistan are nuclear-armed powers, which of course has kept the West slightly concerned, as they do often quite regularly come to fisticuffs, metaphorically speaking, between the two nations. And of course there has always been a fear that this could escalate into something a bit more serious. And of course over the border of both countries is China, who themselves are a nuclear power. So it's a very worrying melting pot. Now, CNN recently wrote a very long, in-depth investigative report, which is actually fascinating, brought out lots of interesting dynamics in the region. And it follows a recent announcement from India that its second nuclear-capable ballistic missile submarine has joined its naval fleet just last month, a move that the Indian government says strengthens its nuclear deterrent. But India is still playing catch-up, at least compared with China, as China's People's Liberation Army grows its fleet, as well as its land and air capabilities, amid simmering tensions along their shared border. Yes, we do know, of course, and we reported regularly of those tensions across the border. Now, the nuclear-powered sub, the INS Arigat, which in Sanskrit means destroyer of the enemy, will, as they say, help in establishing strategic balance in the region. That's according to the Indian Defence Minister, Rajnath Singh. That balance currently is in favour of China, with the world's largest navy by numbers, including 6 operational Jin-class nuclear-powered ballistic submarines that outclass India's 2, the Arigat, and its predecessor in the same class, the Arihant, in firepower. The range of the nuclear-tipped K-15 missiles that this submarine carries is thought to be only around 750 kilometres. That limits the targets that can be struck from the Indian Ocean, so it's pretty critical for India. The INS Arihant class can barely reach Chinese targets along the eastern Sino-Indian border from the coastal waters of the northern Bay of Bengal, which itself is dangerously shallow for a submarine. So a submarine's going to struggle to get into the Bay of Bengal to launch those limited range missiles. So at the moment, India is on the back foot, strategically speaking, from a nuclear perspective. Naval analysts say India is clearly on course to develop a subsea nuclear deterrent that, while it may not be as big as China's, will still pack enough second strike wallop to deter Beijing from taking hostile action. India has newer, bigger subs in the pipeline, and these longer range missiles could have ranges up to 6,000 kilometres. Which would enable strikes anywhere in China. So that next generation will be the key deterrent. These submarines are a key piece of India's broader efforts to establish a secure second strike nuclear force, thus allowing India to hold both Pakistan and Chinese targets in their sights. And it does, of course, do something for India's naval and military psyche. It's a marker of being a great power that the 5 members of the UN Security Council, the US, Russia, China, the UK and France, all have nuclear-capable ballistic missile submarines, or SSBNs. So nuclear-powered submarines are, of course, very complex machines. When things break and they need repairs, or even just needing regular maintenance, it can take a long time, several months. And to keep one at sea at all times is probably going to take more boats than the current 2. And in fact, the West have said they need at least 4 and usually 6 submarines in its fleet to ensure that at least one is always at sea and capable to launch should it ever come to that. The Aragat has been drawing attention from China. Unsurprisingly, this new submarine has, of course, raised eyebrows in China. The state-run newspaper Global Times quoted unnamed Chinese experts saying India should not use it to flex its muscles. This is quite significant. As they say, nuclear weapons should be used in safeguarding peace and stability, not muscle flexing or nuclear blackmailing. Now, they recognise Narendra Modi for what he is. He's ambitious. He's clearly got big ambitions for India and is not afraid of flouting the usual democratic rule of law to get his way. And I think China, not that this is the pot calling the kettle black, but China, the great communist power, recognises Narendra Modi as a potential danger and an unstable character in the region. So they are clearly a little bit afraid of what Narendra Modi might do. All nuclear powers at the moment, one of their key considerations is it's there as a deterrent. It is not there as a first strike capability. It's there just to make sure nobody strikes first against their nations. It is a defensive. The whole concept of nuclear deterrence is a defensive measure. It is not there as an aggressive measure. That's why it has worked so well, and hopefully peace has reigned across the globe. But China, clearly quite concerned about Narendra Modi's government and being nuclear armed, they're thinking, what could they use? What could they do? Now, China's extensive naval build-up and the regular deployment of fully armed nuclear deterrence patrols by Type 94 submarines, the Jin class, are perceived as a threat by other countries in the region, including India. And of course, more submarine investment, therefore, in India is coming to the tune of $31.6 billion over the next decade. That's quite an interesting note as well. Just as a side issue, though, India it has a massive nuclear program. It has a massive space program. It is also one of the nations on the planet with the deepest poverty. So the gap between rich and poor grows. It's pouring money, these billions of dollars, into its nuclear program. Yet it has a pretty shameful level of poverty in the nation. But that is for another discussion. It's not just China that India's looking at with this development. The real impetus for India's expansion and its second strike capability is in fact the significant growth of Pakistan and its relationship with China, and particularly both nations' activities in the Indian Ocean. Pakistan continues to narrow the sea power differential with India. China remains one of Pakistan's most important international backers and a major investor in the country. Now, more globally, the Federation of American Scientists say that multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs as they're called, this is their next generation missiles, can be destabilising. India, Pakistan and China are all developing missiles that can carry these multiple warheads. These are the danger to global peace, and that's what the experts in the West are worried about. These systems are ideal first strike weapons, so they're not so acting much as a deterrent, they are there more as a first strike capability. They're also the first weapons that would likely be targeted in an opposing first strike. As a result, their deployment across the region will likely kick the collective arms race into a higher gear as countries seek to build missile defences and conventional strike options that can counter them. So, firstly, okay, we've got a nuclear arms race stepping up a gear in the region. We do know that India is very concerned about not just Pakistan, but of course China. China, we do know, likewise, is moving its chess pieces around the Indian Ocean. China has it has the largest navy in the world, which of course includes these nuclear-capable submarines, which we do know will probably be patrolling the Indian Ocean on a regular basis. So we do know that their submarines could very easily and very quickly be deployed around India with their nuclear strike capability. Of course, we have Pakistan in the mix. Pakistan tying up its relations with China. which of course is concerning India. And then of course we've got the West, the nuclear armed West, who are courting India, saying, look, you've got these enemies on your doorstep, you need to be working with us. And of course, likewise, the West want India as an ally. It wants that nuclear capability, its launch capability on the subcontinent should ever the proverbial hit the fan and China starts becoming a little bit worryingly aggressive and things lead on to a worse case situation. So we throw Khalistan into the mix. Well, little Khalistan sitting there, nestled like a little, I was going to say a frightened bird, but that is not the case. It will be quite a powerful small kernel sitting, a nut kernel that is, sitting in the midst of three nuclear-powered nations, three vast nuclear-powered nations. This little geographical speck almost sitting there, apparently dominated by these three superpower or three powers surrounding it. But very clearly Khalistan will be an ally of the West. And what more temptation for the West to allow Khalistan to happen? Because what if Khalistan then allowed the US or the UK or Europe, certainly Western powers, to site nuclear missiles on its land? Suddenly the West has a nuclear launch capability, and not just a military capability, but a nuclear capability right slap bang in the middle of these three nations. It's got to be a strategic temptation. As we keep pointing out, there are so many strategic advantages for the West for Khalistan to happen. When we talk about the nuclear capability, you imagine from a Western perspective, if Khalistan says, yeah, we will allow Western nuclear missiles to be located within the heart of Khalistan, suddenly you've got the whole of India, the whole of Pakistan, the whole of China within reach for lower level missiles, not just intercontinental ICBM missiles, but smaller nuclear capable warheads that could be located in Khalistan. You imagine, firstly, the strike capability for the West, having that beachhead in that strategic area against China. Secondly, wow, as a deterrent, Khalistan says we are a nuclear power. By proxy, we are a nuclear power like Israel. And there again, Khalistan could be like another Israel, not just funded, but militarily supported by the West. It stands there, right in the heart of South Asia, nuclear powered as well. You imagine that anybody dares threaten Khalistan from any side. Sorry, but our boxing gloves are bigger than yours. So you take us on at your peril. So James, the dynamics in this are very complex, but fascinating, are they not?
It certainly is, Angus, and I miss the days of past where there was talk from the international community about cutting back on nuclear weapons, about the reduction of nuclear missiles and, less reliance on that. So, I thought that we were moving towards a nuclear-free planet, but unfortunately, it seems that the tides have changed once yet again.
Sadly, yeah, it is the nuclear arms race. Unfortunately, when you get these, let's call them the junior nations catching up, of course they're ambitious. They feel they need, if they want to be up there with the superpowers, they've got to be nuclear armed too. So unfortunately, it's almost a human inevitability. But yeah, it's very worrying for all concerned, and we'll keep an eye on that. Absolutely. So in the pressure of time, let's quickly move on to my third story now. And it's a sad story, this, but one that needs to be remembered. It's Sunday was a very sad anniversary, the 23rd anniversary of the death of a Sikh man in Arizona. On Sunday, the Sikh community of Arizona paused to reflect on the 23rd anniversary of the murder of Balbir Singh Sodhi, a turbaned Sikh man living in Mesa, Arizona. On September the 15th, 2001, Mr. Sodhi was shot in cold blood by a man seeking revenge for the 9/11 attacks. Mr. Sodhi's murder was just one, unfortunately, of hundreds of anti-Sikh hatred incidents tracked by the early Sikh coalition at the time in those days after 9/11. But it was undoubtedly one of the most visceral and heartbreaking for the community. What actually happened happened at a gas station, the Mesa Star Chevron, just like any one of thousands of gas stations in the area and convenience store combos that dot the American landscape. And it was a business that Balbir Singh Sodhi built up from the ground, and in hopes that it would allow him to control his destiny and provide a better life for his family. 4 days after 9/11, as Balbir stood next to a team of landscapers outside the gas station he built, trying to figure out where to plant some flowers, a white man pulled up in a pickup truck and shot and killed him in cold blood. After firing at Balbir, the man drove to another gas station where he shot at a Lebanese clerk and then shot into the home of an Afghan family. Miraculously, he missed both those times. But that same day, a white supremacist killed Waqar Hassan, a Pakistani Muslim and father of 4 daughters, at his Dallas convenience store. By one Yale law professor's estimate in 2004, as many as 17 more Sikhs, Muslims, Arabs and South Asians died in a similar manner in the aftermath of 9/11. Others put the count lower or higher, but countless others were subjected to assaults, slurs, vandalism from their neighbours and racial profiling, etc. Mr. Sodhi's murderer, Frank Rock, died in prison in 2022. Now, Balbir Singh Sodhi, his background: he was born in India in 1949. He grew up in a small village in Punjab, the third oldest of 11 children. He came from a family of farmers, like so many did. Owned a fabric shop before he and his several brothers came to the US in the late 1980s. But he left for the same reasons that many did in those times. Of course, 1984, the genocides, the attack on the Ahmadiyya Sahib. He was one of many hundreds of thousands who fled the fear and oppression, seeking religious freedom and economic opportunity in the US. And like many other Sikh families, members of the Sodhi clan left India at the time. He ended up in California, working at a 7-Eleven, a clothing shop, and as a cab driver before settling in Phoenix to open his gas station. And ironically, about half an hour before he was shot, Balbir emptied out his wallet and donated $75 to a fund for 9/11 victims. He then called his brother Rana and asked him to find some American flags. And the murder of Balbir Singh Sodhi turned his brother Rana into a national advocate against hate. And over the past 20 years, Rana has crisscrossed America to share his brother's story and to educate other Americans on who the Sikhs are and what their community stands for. And near the Arizona state capitol, 54 phrases are etched into a circular piece of steel, each capturing some element of what happened after 9/11. But one of the names carved into that metal is Balbir Singh Sodhi's, along with the phrases "fear of foreigners" and "foreign-born Americans afraid." So, a sad story, James, but it must be remembered just to highlight that how ridiculous the backlash, not ridiculous, but how sad in many ways and twisted the backlash was after 9/11. Of course, Americans were deeply hurt and wounded by that terrible attack that happened on 9/11. But unfortunately, it does show the mob mentality when people get angry and emotional, and they want to take it out on people. And sadly, people like Balbir were the unwitting victims of this need to vent anger and frustration. It's very sad, but it all comes back to education, and the Sikh community doing their best to educate those around them who they are and what they stand for. Of course, 9/11 was perpetrated by extremists, Islamic extremists, but there's a pretty big difference between Islamic extremists and normal followers of Islam, and of course those from the Sikh community. And I think this story just highlights so many issues.
Absolutely, and as we've said before, ignorance begets violence, and violence begets ignorance. The more people understand about different cultures and different backgrounds, the more accepting, understanding, and compassionate we can be as a species. I mean, it just comes down to that.
It does indeed. Right, on that salutary lesson, let's move on to our comments section. Right, we talk about violence against women, and this theme continues. Azad Singh made a comment to remind us large number of gang rapes of Sikh women took place in 1984 all over India, particularly Delhi. And still, we have seen no justice. We want freedom. Absolutely understandable. This does highlight the fact, and particularly when we did our series of stories covering all the events of 1984, and I do urge the viewers, last year I did an in-depth running story of the events of 1984, all the way through the build-up to Operation Blue Star, what happened in the aftermath, the assassination of Indira Gandhi, and then, of course, the subsequent dreadful carnage, the genocide against the Sikh community that happened. And, of course, we went into great detail about what happened, the dreadful, inhuman torture, gang rapes, setting fire to innocent Sikh men, women, and indeed children. Just the crimes that were committed in that year were just shocking. I mean, it literally brings tears to the eyes to repeat them. And as Ed very rightly reminds people that this inherent violence against women found its worst outlet in 1984. It is shocking. But go back and watch those that series of four programs that we did to cover the events of 1984. They are on our channel, so have a look for those. And Jasleen, this is an interesting one. Jasleen reminds us, or not just reminds, it informs many of us who didn't know this. The Hindu religion, actually, one of its scriptures, one of its stories that it recounts is this story of a female deity, Vaishnav Devi, who was one of her greatest worshippers, a gentleman called Byron, who evoked her through his prayers. When she appeared, he fell in lust and tried to attack her. So that we have this sort of sexual assault in the religious scriptures. And as the story unfolds, there is a temple built. This figure, Vaishnav Devi, disappeared into a rock, and subsequently this rock is revered. But those who go to pay homage to this rock and this figure, Vaishnav Devi, they also have to pay homage to Byron, the person who lustfully attacked this figure. And this figure is also known as Mata, or meaning mother. So as Jasleen rightly points out, though the Mata supposedly cut Byron's head in the end before disappearance in the rock, the moral of the story: man can attack woman, but can still command respect, because you have to pay respect to Byron V's head, as well as this figure who was attacked. So again, it's inherent in their holy scriptures, apparently. I don't know if this is right, but according to Jasleen, this is the case, James. So if it's in your holy scriptures that it's okay, essentially, even subliminally okay, to attack even a goddess, of course you're going to see just mortal women as objects of nothing, of no respect. Of course you're going to use and abuse and assault women. Why wouldn't you if it's okay in the scriptures?
Yeah, and it's something that's going to take generations to correct and to change, but it's got to start somewhere, and we're just not seeing a real jump on it.
Yeah, so thank you for pointing that out. It's again, it points to a deeper problem in Hindu society, particularly, that if it's okay to essentially by default, by proxy, rape a goddess, then yeah, what are you going to do to ordinary women in the street? It sends out completely the wrong message. So let's move on. We've come back to this terrible story of the young Sikh student who was murdered, who was knifed with a box cutter knife outside. He was an employee of Tim Horton. And RKS, rightly says, well, we should boycott Tim Hortons, because Tim Hortons' response was pretty disappointing, bearing in mind that this victim was an employee at the time of Tim Hortons. Well, is it the right way to go? That's really up to you as an individual. But James, I think we were disappointed at Tim Hortons' reaction across this story.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that Tim Hortons is one of the largest employers of foreign workers in Canada. So boycotting them could actually go the wrong direction in punishing and reducing hours for a lot of Indian nationals who are here working under the foreign employment program. So it's really a balancing act and a double-edged sword in some ways.
Yeah. So if it's up to you if you want to boycott Tim Hortons, I'll leave that as an individual choice. 5AAB makes this comment. We've been talking about fake Sikhs, and of course the reaction to Rahul Gandhi's comments in the United States about India seeing non-Hindus as religiously inferior, and the states like Punjab particularly as being inferior states. But we've bizarrely seen a group of Sikhs standing up for the BJP and representing the BJP and the RSS, defending the RSS seemingly incomprehensibly, bearing in mind everything that we know about the RSS and what they stand for. Now, 5AAB makes the point that Hardeep Puri is not a Sikh. Kezadari Hindu, yes, but not a Sikh. This person has no self-respect for himself. Not every turban-wearing person is a Sikh. Sikhs use the Singh as their name, but by the Sikh Code of Conduct, only the baptised Amritdhari Sikh can use Singh or Kaur with their first names, and never can they use the caste name like Grewal, Man or whatever. Well, thank you for highlighting that. This gets into the very complex, or the deep complexities of what it is to be a true Sikh. Whether it's an Amritdhari Sikh, Sejdari Sikh, it's all an education for us, is it not, James?
A very good education at that.
I mean, I'm trying to keep up. It is deeply complex, but yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It's interesting to read things like this. It helps us get our heads around this very complex system, but it's fascinating nonetheless. Right, and I was delighted to report we've had, as James rightly said at the beginning of the show, we've had lots of you still letting us know where you're coming from. Thank you very much where you're watching from. Do keep those comments coming in, again, because it's fascinating and it's really interesting to see where our audience, if you haven't done it already, why not just drop us a little comment to tell us where you are watching us from. It helps us in so many ways, not least it's just interesting to see where everybody is around the globe. And I'm delighted to say, as we reported just the other day when we did a quick analysis, a quick cursory analysis of our viewers, we did have one gentleman from Australia at the time, and we said, yeah, we don't cover enough about Australia. I think we neglect poor Down Under, and our apologies for that. So I'm delighted to see that we have a couple of viewers who themselves have put their heads up above the parapet and said, hey, we exist, we're here too. That's Amrinder Singh, listening from Australia. Welcome to you, Amrinder. Thank you for watching. Great to have you joining us. And Nirmal Singh, this is a fascinating story. Nirmal, ex-Malaysian, been Australia Down Under for 50 years. My ex was a Dinkum Dai Aussie of Irish, English and German descent, supporting Khalistan since June 1984. Khalistan, Zindabad, love Australia. So what a wonderful mix of nations there, James.
Absolutely. And one of the trends online are these idiots that say that they'll go to Australia and fight kangaroos and win. Hey, we're not doing those videos, and we know that we would get our asses kicked. If I was there with a kangaroo, I'd probably look like a beach seal trying to battle back.
Indeed. But it's also lovely to see. I mean, this guy has obviously done. Yeah, he's travelled the world by the sounds of it, and ending up in Australia. But it just shows the diaspora. You know, what happened in 1984 had such a deep impact that he's been a Khalistani since 1984. And it's worth pointing out also, and I think it's worth pointing out to the Indian government, just as a simple, basic human lesson to learn, the Khalistan movement was there to some degree. It was obviously a lot smaller. But the whole point about 1984, the lead up to 1984, wasn't about independence. It was just about, just give us some more rights. The Anandpur resolution before the attack on the Golden Temple was just a simple, decent, reasonable plea to the Indian government. Look, just give us some basic human rights that you are denying us in the Punjab. That's all we ask. They weren't asking. Bhindranwale wasn't asking for an independent state at the time. It wasn't at that time. It wasn't all about independence. It was just about simple, basic human rights. And of course, the Indian government just threw a sledgehammer to crack that nut. And look what's happened. You've got now a massive Khalistan movement globally now, simply because of the actions of the Indian government you've driven. Ironically, trying to drive out the Khalistan movement, all you've done is you've fed it. And here is a prime example in Nirmal down in Australia. This movement is growing, it's gaining momentum simply because of the actions of the Indian government. So let that be a lesson to you, the Brahmins. All you've done is you've grown this movement. The law of unintended consequences, James. I love that one.
That's true. Very true.
Right, Azad has contributed an awful lot of comments recently, but I picked out a couple of his. James and Angus keep denying that not all Hindus are communal, racist or anti-Sikh each time. Yeah, this comes back to James. We've covered this a few times. And I think it's probably Azad who keeps countering us. I think we both have said regularly, look, you can't paint all Hindus with this with this criticism. They're not all bad. And I still stand by this. But James, as Azad points out, I mean, at the end of the day, we're not Sikhs. We've not been subjected to the dreadful oppression and horrible things that have happened to the Sikh community for decades, if not longer. So yeah, I think Azad, we'll probably have to agree to disagree on this one. In that, so you are pretty clear that you see all Hindus essentially as bad because of what's happened. I think we'll have to agree to disagree on that one, won't we, James?
Well, and I think that there's a lot of people out there that would agree and a lot of people out there that would disagree from all sides of the argument. So, yeah, absolutely. We agree to disagree and we'll leave it at that one.
But his second point is actually quite interesting. And I think this gives us quite an interesting insight into why so many, not so many, but a group of Sikhs, let's maybe wrongly, but whatever, let's call them the fake Sikhs, for the sake of giving them a name, labelling them. The fake Sikhs are supporting the BJP and therefore the RSS, essentially because of commercial interest. They feel, firstly, they've got so much invested in businesses and everything that they're keeping close to the BJP, essentially trying to protect their own business interests. And essentially they're trying to stay safe, which I suppose to some degree is understandable. But ultimately, it comes back to the fact that ultimately you're betraying your own principles for the sake of protecting your own commercial assets. And this is, I think, even what I know, the limited amount I understand of Sikhi, is that stands really against the whole principles of Sikhi, which are all about the fundamental morality of your principles. Really override, your Sikhi principles should override everything. And the whole commercial aspect of life, one of the central tenets of Sikhi is you've got to donate. You've got to donate a certain percentage of your income to those in need, which again implies this whole sharing. Everything that you accumulate, you've got to share to those in need. And I think those fake Sikhs who are essentially protecting their commercial interests, I think this goes against the central philosophy of Sikhi. So again, I think they are betraying their principles. I'd be interested in our audience's angle on this. Do you think I'm wrong in that? Do you think I'm right in that? Give me a bit more of a Sikh-based perspective on that. James, I think that's my interpretation of this. I think I would suggest they are betraying their principles to protect their own commercial interests.
Absolutely. And I mean, let's face it, in India, doesn't matter what religion, what race, doesn't matter. There is a problem with people paying income tax in India and contributing their fair share. But when you look at Sikhs, they are very committed to building community, standing together, fighting for the weak, for the oppressed, and they give of themselves, and that includes their bank accounts. So, I understand the argument, but I would like to hear more of it.
Yeah. So thank you, Azad, for your comments. Harbinder Sandhu says, this comes back to, the story about the rude Hindus who were visited by the Canadian MPs. And they sent a bit of a rude letter back saying you didn't send the right MPs. And you made the point, I guess all missed an important point here. Did this temple president or any other Hindu citizen shared any grievances to these particular MPs that were ignored, so that the temple had any past bad taste with the MPs in question? I think the point being raised here is actually what we don't know. And James, I don't think we do know this. Has there been bad blood between this temple and the political party? The Conservatives that sent their MPs. I don't know is the answer to that, Harbinder. James, I don't know if you found any other details of that story locally, but I don't know if there is any bad blood that existed beforehand.
No bad blood that I'm aware of. And also keep in mind that several of them are upcoming candidates, so they haven't built a history with any of the community organizations or religious locations and such. So yeah, it definitely doesn't appear to be anything from any incidents that have happened in the past, and it's very, very common for politicians of various religious or other backgrounds to show up at events such as this without incident. So,
yeah. So, yeah, a good comment. We don't know, but thank you for pointing that out. And James, our final comment of the show comes from Inderpreet Singh. Mr. James and Mr. Angus, and I guess by the turn of phrase you're in the United States here, y'all will be an integral part of Khalistan. You are doing your Seva, our selfless service. Thank you. It is an absolute pleasure, is it not, James, to be doing our bit for Khalistan?
Absolutely, and I love the y'all part, where it makes me think that this person's also a Western Canadian cowboy.
Well, I think we can dip our cowboy hat to Inderpreet for that comment. So thank you very much indeed for your comment. And James and I will, of course, continue to do our Seva, our selfless service. We will do our bit for Khalistan, which we do believe, obviously, is a cause worth fighting for, as indeed, hopefully, do most of our audience. But unfortunately, yes, we have been beaten by time once again. We must draw things to a close. But thank you, as always, for all your comments. Do keep them coming in. It gives us lots to talk about, lots to laugh about, but lots to get serious about too. And it is, of course, very educational to have your input, certainly from the community, to make sure that we stay on the straight and narrow. So thank you for those comments. Do keep them coming in. And don't forget, you can, of course, email us directly at message@satlegetv.com if there's anything you'd like to let us know that you don't want to put in the public domain. So email us directly through that method. But in the meantime, you have been watching Perspectives. It is a goodbye from me, and it is a goodbye from James.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks for watching. We will see you next time.